Well, you're listening to another INTJf trade interview session. I am your host, TGA, and tonight I'll be interviewing Kirsanov. Kirsanov, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Close enough. It's a Russian name, so it's fine. In Russian, it's pronounced Kirsanov, but you can just call me Kirs. Uh, or actually, the first name of the character, Nicholas, is fine. So
Okay, I'll try with Kirs. All right,
that goes.
kind of start us off. Do you by any chance remember the first time you were introduced to MBTI and what was your type result from that?
Yes. The first time I was introduced to a variant of MBTI was a freshman in high school, so that must have been like 2009. And back then, I was typed as an ISTJ, and I realized that for a while I oftentimes was placing answers of what I wanted to be, especially since I was at the beginning of high school. I had this idea of what a good student and worker was, especially from my parents. So that unfortunately uh, caused a misinterpretation in type, and so I remained an ISTJ probably all the way up until senior of high school, and then I joined INTJ Forum when I was a freshman in college in 2012. And that is when I started studying more of the cognitive functions and the dichotomies. And that is also when I sort of dabbled in whether I was an INTJ, INTP, and then I finally settled with INFJ after several threads and conversations with other members.
Okay. Well, when you initially read the archetype of an ISTJ, did you at any point feel it was out of place?
Um, Oftentimes I did just because I felt that I didn't have some of the weird, um, so when they described SI, introverted sensing, I just did not really connect it with it too well. Yes, I have a pretty good memory, but other than that, I remember speaking with members on a personality cafe who would say that, they'd be able to go outside and then remember almost vividly the sensations they had felt during a picnic in the same place, 5, 6 years before. And there was so various things with regards to sensation that I definitely did not have.
Mhm. Was that just one thing that kind of stood out for you that you felt uncomfortable fitting, or were there also a slew of other things that just made you
Um,
go, yeah, that's probably not a good fit?
it's also not a good fit too because I was constantly saying that I was on time and organized, and finally when I took a step back from it in college, I am pretty much always running late. Uh, Quite disorganized with things, and so there's a lot of many things which were considered, let's say, main features of the ISTJ, which, if I did a fair and accurate self-evaluation, I did not fit or adhere to those features at all.
Okay. So when you talked about going through your freshman year in college and being tested, I think it was a combination of like an INTJ or an INTP.
Mhm.
What was those descriptions and how did those feel? Not rather, how did they feel towards you, and whether it fit or just kind of stood out in a similar fashion as an ISTJ, where it just didn't fit at all either.
With regards to INTJ and INTP, the um, let's see here. When they talked about oftentimes being disconnected from various sensory things, that really melded well because I remember there was times when, I didn't even notice there was like a whole crack in my car until like a week after it happened and people started bringing it up, for instance. Or I was very good, and one of the reasons why I chose literature for and language for university was I'm very good at like pattern recognition, especially among different works of literature. So, and I never really could find that in other types other than sort of an NT. So that's why I was almost thoroughly convinced I was an NT just because of that pattern recognition, and I never felt that I had this really deep connection with people because the INFJ archetype would oftentimes sound like you are just so involved with another person. It's, you feel so deeply for them. And whenever I read those descriptions, they oftentimes felt and seemed just too artificial. And that's why I was pretty sure I was an NT until, believe it or not, it was Katsama I had several conversations with over Skype, and she was the one who highly recommended that I at least try out INFJ, and she was pretty sure that I was one. And I took a psychology class my freshman year of college, so it's just been a period of growth and understanding, and I think the INFJ just type has fit the most.
So what is it about the INFJ type that you feel more comfortable or having it fit for you?
So with regards to INFJ archetype, introverted intuition. When I first read the cognitive function descriptions for it, I think introverted intuition. Yes, people, remark with like yawn or whatever and talk about how, oh, it's the most mysterious or mystical and all this bullshit, honestly. But I think there's just a very poor description of it, and I recognized that my own thought process actually follows this introverted intuition. It's just often poorly described by these people when they want to make a stereotypical version of it. So, for instance, when I would be doing pattern recognition with in literature classes, oftentimes, I wouldn't be thinking specifically like, are there other characters that I know like this? Rather, what would happen is, for instance, the professor or I would read or the discussion would move into, and they would talk about, let's say, let's see here. For instance, defamiliarization, just to give a short and quick little example, is a concept in literature which refers to taking something that's familiar but describing it in an unfamiliar fashion. And when I think of that, what immediately comes to mind as sort of a pattern recognition is a moment in Tolstoy's War and Peace when he describes a soldier running through the battlefield with a piece of wood and a long piece of fabric attached to it. He's describing a flag, but at the same point, I didn't have to think about it. The connection was just instantaneous, and I can't really tell you, oh, this is my thought process of like how I came about from A to B and B to C. Sometimes it takes me time in explaining. There is some rationality and a logic behind it, but sometimes that logic is a bit convoluted or hard to explain.
Okay. Then in terms of what, or rather with INFJ, is there something that you don't fit perfectly with, trait that you have?
Let's see here. Probably some of the mystical aspects of the type. They like to make this INFJ sound like they're a psychic and can read things, and honestly, that's when it becomes more pseudoscience than anything. So I definitely say that. Um, Sometimes I think it's easier to point out the ENFJ, not just because they're more extroverted, but also because they're more willing to show those feelings, whereas um, I am willing to insert a bit of disharmony or not necessarily agree with someone's viewpoint if it's going to further that discussion or conversation. And this is where oftentimes people, when they first meet me or on the forum, um, that long-term members normally peg me as an INFJ, but short-term members would oftentimes see me as an INTJ. And part of it comes from my academic background where I don't want to say that INFJs aren't critical, but from the work that I have to do and the analysis, it's necessary to take um, not necessarily a completely objective perspective, but you have to subject your interpretation to a form of logic and rationality. It cannot be just this loosey-goosey thing. So I think the INFJ, when they talk about how they're completely irrational or various things like that, I don't fit with that either. So I'd say those two perspectives with regards to the how they interact with people, the relationship portion, and then the logic and reasoning portion are the two, especially for, at least in my experience, male INFJs, the two most misunderstood aspects.
Mm. Well, then that kind of raises the question, because you being in the academic field and being very, or being required to be in a position of being objective and analyzing text and reading, do you think you would be this comfortable in terms of voicing your opinion or calling someone out there wrong or putting something under an objective lens?
Um, with what regards? Are you saying if I was not in an academic position, would
Mm-hmm.
I feel the same way
Yeah.
and act the same way? I believe I would, because I've acted this way honestly since before college, but it's just become more refined. And for instance, when people talk about, you know, various, let's say, like an INFJ maybe retreating away and not wanting to have the personal debate because it would destroy the harmony. I've experienced that, but it's more oftentimes a personal argument. So for instance, I could give you the example of I had an argument with one of my older sisters at one point, and during that time, uh, it was going to be the choice of me saying something incredibly hurtful with regards to her significant other, and I chose not to say it. She believed that was the incorrect and immature response to it because I just walked off and refused to continue the argument. And so there are various things like emotional things. It's just I'm hesitant to say that it's all this psychic mysticism and always feeling and always harmony and this and that, especially for males too, because at least within American society, males are often conditioned to hold back their emotions and feelings. So I remember moments at, for instance, a funeral when wanting to comfort, for instance, a family relative, but feeling almost hopeless and helpless because not that it would be against the norms, but it just felt odd, especially because this was before I was really comfortable with my own type and comfortable with being myself. So the journey of self-discovery is a huge thing too. I think within an NF archetype in general, and just people, especially when they're young.
So going through this journey and kind of settling being an INFJ, do you feel more comfortable, as you say, embracing the F side and understanding that's a part of you?
Uh, Definitely. I definitely have to say that. I remember speaking with various members on the forum, and what it deals with, sometimes my F side, if we just want to use the dichotomies rather than the functions, uh, it comes out especially in my work, uh, because although I'm objective and analytical with these like literary papers, it's the why am I drawn to Russian literature, for instance, or Russia in general? Part of it comes from my heritage, but another part also comes from it has these features of Russian literature oftentimes confronts the misery and it directly confronts the suffering that people deal with throughout their life rather than having this perfect utopia or this artificial. I mean, I know I'm making horrible generalizations and a French literature professor would slap me right now, but
Okay.
like the artificiality of some of like the French 18th and 19th century novels. uh and so that's where sometimes it's been a connection among literature, the arts, music. I'm often deeply affected by personal letters. I mean, I have a whole collection of those that, uh, so getting back to, I think, your question, yeah, I'm definitely more comfortable with my F side. And I think I probably should have been more comfortable with it for a lot longer time. It was just dealing with own personal issues and believing that, I had to be someone else or a different type or this or that rather than acceptance, self-acceptance. So,
Okay. Then, kind of circling back and looking into your selection of literature, or specifically Russian literature, that was actually going to be my next question. You kind of already answered half of it, but what was it initially, I imagine, in high school that had you or motivated you towards moving towards literature as a major?
um, so it's actually pretty funny because I planned on being I've I've wanted to go for doctoral studies, believe it or not. I'm a crazy person since 7 years old. I don't know why, but I planned on following my dad and grandfather who were both chemists, and I was always much better at math and science compared to the arts and literature. And I'd say Russian literature began, I think I was a sophomore. I read Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. But it wasn't just that. It was the heritage aspect from my dad's side. Um, and I just really enjoyed literature enough and realized, hey, I can make quite a bit of money in chemistry and the sciences, but where am I being called? Where am I being drawn to? And I always wanted to learn Russian, so that's what I went with and came into the university with. I've had enormous help from my professors, and I actually will be hopefully attending graduate school in the fall for Slavic languages and literature for a master's and PhD program. Um, but yeah, I can't necessarily pinpoint it to. I wouldn't say, oh, it's just because I read that one novel in sophomore year of high school. It was just, I think, recognizing that I could always get something new in interpretations, and I really enjoyed literature and like history classes, even if I wasn't as good at them at that time. And then just making the leap of faith. So,
Okay. Then, kind of circling back even further, then you were talking about how you were conflicted between showing emotions, and one of the examples you pointed out was being in a funeral, wanting
yes.
to try and show emotion in terms of giving relief or empathy, but then feeling you're beholden and holding back, uh, being a male.
Hmm.
Could possibly going into literature be a way of you satisfying that F side?
Um, I think potentially, definitely less. Yes. Uh, and I think I just was, for instance, in that past example, it was a time when I had not really been comfortable with myself. So now it is all right if someone if I make a joke or this or that and someone says, oh, that's a little bit out there or strange or, once in a while weird, but, they're still my friends. And the fact that they accept me, uh, I'm more willing to be myself and show those emotions compared to what I was back then. I wouldn't say it's literature gives me um, all of the, let's say, gratification or satisfaction of being an F. I think it comes from the reason why I like literature and history is the discussion aspect. I can uh, discuss it on and on with colleagues, peers, professors, anyone and everyone who's interested. Uh, and I mean, I really just enjoy having these interactions, interviews, symposiums. I've given a few talks at, uh, acting every once in a while, just a little bit informally, of course. But just everything. It's sort of all holistically combines into that F portion.
Sounds like you've got quite a bit of extra feeling function going on there. Then kind of looking into a little further back, and when you were talking just a bit in terms of I'm trying to remember, I think it was introverted intuition part
Uh-huh.
where you were talking about a lot of people had this misnomer, misconception of it being very mystical and you having psychic abilities.
Hmm.
Can you kind of break it down as to what it really is for the people who are not as familiar with the cognitive functions?
Just specifically introverted intuition or a quick rundown of the other three in addition to an I?
Just introverted intuition in itself and how it applies to you
Okay,
only. Yeah.
so let's see. Uh, well, um, let me. Sorry, I've been doing a lot of research on random things, and so I was in school mode until uh, I'm just little refresher on what they want to say. Okay, so a lot of, for instance, the description on Personality Junkie, they talk about like symbols, images, patterns, dreams. That, yes, but I would say they like to say it's like pattern connection among images. For me, it's imageless. So I close my eyes and I am not going to see a beautiful image of these connections or my thought process. Instead, it's almost like I can project and feel as if there is like a portrait of the instance, but I'll never be able to see that portrait. I just know it though. Um, so, I mean, I don't want to say it definitely isn't like logically straightforward as I mean, I know that would go to like extroverted thinking, for instance, but or it's not as bouncy as extroverted intuition, but it's oftentimes taking tons of information. So character novels, people, for tons of interactions, for instance, with one of my friends, let's say, and then taking all of that and then just like the mind automatically just boils and condenses it down into something that's simpler, but will also um, it the simple concept gives a holistic impression. So taking, for instance, a theory like the comment I made about defamiliarization and giving like a simple definition or a simple example such as the flag one. So it's taking all the information, just condensing it into something small, but it's not something that I can consciously like, oh, let me take all this and then, here, let me try to condense this into thing. It just happens. And then seeing how that, like one little thing or one aspect of a person, then applies to the, I don't like to say like bigger picture, but sometimes the macrocosm. Uh, so how like little things build up and make this world of ours or that person. There's these little aspects, but yeah, I know that's a horrible description, but that's how I experience it, I'd say. It's, uh, yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to give a better description than that, though.
No. Okay. Well, it was worth a shot. Well,
Yeah.
then, kind of moving a little forward, then in terms of other interests and passions, taking a other side of literature and Russian literature in specific, what other things do you do, like your hobbies?
Let's see here. Hobbies. Once I like to try just random different things. Cooking and baking is always fun. Um, I love baking desserts. Dancing, always interesting. Took a ballroom dancing class a couple semesters ago that was not for credit or anything, but I've wanted to learn musical instrument, just never had the time, so that's why I'm like focusing on some of the other things like the dancing. Uh, Sometimes hobbies or interests. I mean, you normally don't hear like introverts like to go out, or like spend all this time, but I'll admit I like to go out to the bars and to the clubs or whatever and hang out with people, go dance, wild at that one college bar out there and then go back to my normal life of reading and studying and writing, during the day. But so that's why sometimes people like joke that like I'm, complex or enigmatic, or they don't understand why I would like understand this, like these two various things, or I love rom-coms. They let me, I love shoes and clothing. Probably spend way too much time on that, on websites and the construction quality of them, not just appearance. Wine, I'd say wine and shoes are like my two big things that people, since I often read pretty obscure literature or history, it's normally talking about wine or shoes with random people. So um, yeah, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm willing to try things new, and I'm interested in, if a lot of my friends are not in literature or history, just because I like having conversations about things that I don't have expertise in necessarily, because I get to learn new things and absorb it and contemplate it and talk about it. And so yeah, I mean, I think yeah, those are pretty much my major interests, hobbies, outside things.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. So definitely have somewhat of an east side, other than what
oh
people
yeah,
would believe that all introverts are stuck in a cave somewhere.
oh yeah, no, yeah. For my introversion, I'd definitely say, uh, I remember back in high school, prom was like a 3-day long event thing that we had, the after party at least. And after the 3 days, let me tell you, I was completely exhausted and did not want to be around any of those people. But uh, so the introversion is definitely there. But and I need the time to recharge. But I think this is sometimes a common aspect or trait of the INFJ, is that they can sometimes appear like the most extroverted introvert, people will say. But and I found that quite true. And although I mean, people normally will say outgoing or talkative or this or that. But the big qualification is if you're willing to make like the effort, because I'm not a big one of searching new people out. It's more if you make like the little effort and sort of introduce yourself or you know in the beginning, then it's a smooth sail and everything. But yeah, so that's sort of my social habits.
Okay. Then, in terms of traits, what would be a trait that you would like to have or see others have that are easy to them, and you find yourself kind of struggle with, and you would like to kind of incorporate as part of you?
Uh, I'd probably say one of my closest friends is one of those people who can he can talk to anyone and everyone, and it's that fact that um, tons of people. It's not that I'm jealous of him, but it's the fact that he can connect and talk with anyone, and he knows all of these people. So sometimes hoping or wishing and making that like introductory phase a little bit easier and less terrifying and less energy. Just it takes tons of energy out of me when I'm meeting new people or going to an event where I know at least one. If I don't know at least one person's going to the event, it can be, and it's not something required of me. It can be, sometimes a very stressful in the beginning. So having all this energy, and then sometimes with regards to interactions with people would be I wish I could be a little bit kinder or a little bit more compassionate and sometimes not be as take things I wouldn't say maybe not compassionate. I wish I wasn't always so sensitive with what people say. Because people might say it as a joke. I recognize as a joke, a little bit of a a deprecating humor, but just recognizing sometimes that that's all it is a joke, and not having to take it too much or over analyzing as a whole thing. I have relatives and people all who always recommend just live in the moment. And if my mind just wasn't always racing to what is the future, what is this, what is that, oh yes, I didn't do well, and this, how can I change that? Why can't I just say, hey, here I am in my dorm room, let me just breathe this warm air, sit down, watch a movie, and not think. So yeah, no, that's like 2 or 3 traits that I wish I could have.
Okay. The easy, just shut your brain off and kind of coast.
Yes, yes.
Then in terms of traits that you already do have, what is one thing that you kind of, let's say, take pride or proud that you have, and something that just comes very easily for you, that others are kind of in awe in?
Well, I'll say sort of 2 that are normally connected with each other, which I never really recognized until later on. One would be probably I have a very good memory, but that's sort of a just little quirk thing. And that helps me especially when I give speeches, or for instance this. So this conversation, I have, this will kind of touch on the cognitive functions or whatever. I have no clue where I'm going with it. People would say extroverted thinking, okay, that's where they're going to go, that they know this is their goal for it. I pretty much, this whole thing, I could give you the same interview tomorrow and it might be completely different, might be completely the same. I can just sort of talk and let it be. So I enjoy the ability to sort of improvise on the spot. I sometimes rely on it too often, especially when giving presentations, but I enjoy it. And then I know I can write very I can write very well, and I use that to my ability because I enjoy giving, writing handwritten letters to my friends, maybe once a year or every once in a while, especially when they're having a rough time, and trying to convey, those moments that we've shared and the things about that person that I admire in them and how much they have helped me in like the journey of life or things like that. So, and I know it could sound prideful or this or that, but people will say how much that these letters have affected them or drawn them to tears. And sometimes like you, you just get in this passion of writing or speaking and it just kind of goes. And that's probably the trait that just that passion and fluidity that I mean, I'm probably not fluid at all, but I at least enjoy the way I think and talk and write. So there you go.
Okay. Then kind of going a little further, because we are running a little bit of, well, okay, somewhat of an overtime already,
Oh,
but going,
sorry.
that's all right. But in terms of when you were talking about initially considering going into or becoming a chemist, like your dad and your grandfather, and then now you're becoming majoring or going to a doctorate program for literature, or specifically Russian literature, what was kind of your parents' reaction with that?
Let's say, so part of it was I worked at my grandfather's lab, scientific lab, and really didn't enjoy the work that I was doing there. Uh, let's just say my grandpa was very disappointed, and I still think that he believes I might somehow change for grad school and go into chemistry. My dad was hesitant at first, um, but once I convinced him that, okay, even if I can't be an academic and professor because tenure track positions are limited, I could go into government service. Translation is always there for the side. There's non-governmental organizations. So there's plenty of opportunities, honestly, with most humanities majors. It's just you have to have the ability to market it and be confident in your ability and know, hey, I've learned Russian. Yeah, the literature stuff might be a little bit of a side thing. It shows that I can analyze things, though. I can write a condensed report for you if you would like. So it's really about marketing. My mom really didn't care too much. She was happy with whatever I did. She majored in psychology in college, so and then went into business. So yeah, no. My dad took a little bit of convincing, but it wasn't too much of a problem. And on top of it, both of his parents were Russian and from Russia, and my aunts are. So the fact that like kind of continuing on the heritage maybe was like a little bonus too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. Then kind of fast forwarding
yeah,
a little bit in the future, just so we kind of wrap things up here.
yeah.
Should you have offspring and they also want to pursue in the same goal that you're in, also in literature, potentially maybe just stick with Russian literature, that the same route you took, or some other kind of literature, what would be kind of your reaction with that?
I would be extremely happy for them in whatever they choose. You know, I'm not very athletic at all. I'll admit that, but I still enjoy, for instance, dancing or physical activities. Uh, so just because you're not good at something doesn't mean you can't recognize uh, someone's passion and ability for it. And so if my child was an athlete or pursued literature, I would be happy as long as they're pursuing something, not even if it's like, oh, a dream, but they feel comfortable with it. So I would be happy. And I mean, of course, I would, tell them about like career prospects and, you can make more money, let's say, as a business or engineer, man. But no, I wouldn't necessarily say like really push them towards it, but it's I already know I'll definitely read to my children and buy them books and all those things. So as long as they have a relative, love or passion for literature and reading, that's all that I could ask for. I don't care if they major in it or not. I will support them.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We are at overtime. We're almost 40 minutes in.
Yep.
And a couple seconds down. So I'll just stop the recording here.